Hi there, my name is Sarah Wins, and today I'm going to tell you about my life literacy map. Alright, so the first book that I'm going to talk to you about is called The Jungle Book, and it is by Rudyard Kipling. This book was the very first book that I ever became obsessed with, and I'm a pretty avid reader, so that's something to remember. When I was little and I first got to reading in this book, I was so obsessed. I carried the book everywhere I went because I wanted anyone to read it to me. My grandparents, my parents, people with their works, anywhere, because I wanted people to read it to me. I'd ask Mom every night before bed to read this to me, and when she finished, I would beg her to read it again and again and again and again. So this was actually the very first book that I ever became obsessed with. The second book that I'm going to talk to you about is called Play Ball, Amelia Bedelia by Peggy Parrish. Probably around the first grade, my mom, my sisters, and I had some books that we got from a garage sale. And throughout this entire project, you're going to hear all about the garage sale experiences because my grandma and grandpa were obsessed with garage sales. So I always had books from garage sales. Anyway, we had a whole box of them one time, and I was super excited to see which ones I was capable of reading. There were small ones and big ones, and I just really wanted to know what I could read. At this point, I had just become capable of reading books on my own, and this was the first book that I actually remember reading by myself. I actually made the accomplishment and read it all by myself with no help. I was so proud of this accomplishment that I read this book 3 and 4 times a day because I knew that I could read it. So the third book that I'm going to talk to you about is called You're All My Favorites by Sam McBratney. This book is a book that I had to call my mom and ask about because moms know best, and she knew exactly what she read to me when I was little. So this is one of the books that first came into her mind. When I was about probably 6 years old, I think, my mom gave birth to the youngest of my 3 sisters named Gracie. My mom told me that she was scared that all 3 of us would not understand that she loved all of us equally because we were so young. And she wanted to make sure that we knew that she loved all of us equally. So to do this, she went from store to store, and she finally found this book called You're All My Favorites. To assure us of the fact that, yes, she loves all of us equally, she bought the book, and she replaced the pronouns he, she, mom, dad. She replaced all of those with our names specifically. This let us all know that we were loved by our mom and dad equally. Even though my sister was a baby, my mom continued to read this all the way up until my little sister could read on her own. The fourth book that I'm going to talk to you about is called Three Billy Goat Gruff by Jorgen Moe and Peter Christen Abjordsson. This book is super special to me because it reminds me of my grandma's house. My mammy absolutely loves garage sales, just like I mentioned earlier. She's obsessed with garage sales, actually. And every time she goes, she used to get us something from them. So one of the trips, she got me this book, Three Billy Goats Gruff. I thought this was the greatest present ever because I got to sit with my mammy in her chair as she read the book to me. And my sisters had to wait to see all the pictures until after I had seen them. She kept this book in a big wooden crate at the bottom of her bookshelf. And anytime that I wanted her to read it to me, all I had to do was just go over there and pick it up, and she would read it to me. Just about every time I go over there now, like to this day, I go to that bookshelf and I pick up that book and I read it, and I sit on her floor right in front of it and I sit there and read it. The next book that I'm talking to you about is The Cat in the Hat by Dr. Seuss. Everybody loves The Cat in the Hat. Everybody loves Dr. Seuss. But I had kind of a weird reason that I liked them. So, books are still a big part of my house. My mom is addicted to reading, and she loves all kinds of books, and she gave a lot of books to us. So probably around the 5th grade, I decided that I was going to be a teacher. I had my heart set on it, and I just really wanted to be a teacher. So I had it in my head that every teacher had Dr. Seuss books. Yes, really, that pretty much to be a teacher, you had to have a Dr. Seuss book. And I don't know why, but that's what I thought. So for my birthday that year, all I wanted was Dr. Seuss books. And my grandma got me this giant stack of Dr. Seuss books. And when I first opened it, I remember opening it right to The Cat in the Hat. And I sat down right there and read it because right then I felt like a real teacher. The next book I'm going to talk about is called The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. And Eric Carle is a super popular author. So on the screen you'll see flash a few more of his books rather than just The Very Hungry Caterpillar. But this is the first one that I became interested in. So in high school we had a program called Instructional Practices, and this was kind of like practice in being a student teacher. We got to go into the class during our class time and teach the kids lessons and help out the teacher wherever they needed to be. So the very first class that I got placed in was a class by, the teacher's name was Miss Susan Ziegler. Her room was decorated in everything Eric Carle. She had every book with every single stuffed animal that went with it. She was a special education teacher at the time, and this classroom is where I first learned that my heart was set on special education. I mean, I knew I wanted to be a special education teacher, but I was kind of unsure about it because a lot of people say it's really hard, and I didn't know if I was up to the challenge. But when I got to step into this classroom, I finally realized that that is really what I wanted to do. After that year, I began to collect everything Eric Carle, the stuffed animals, the books, and I wanted to match it up with everything that she had. And this book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, was the very first one that I got. Alright, so next is Frog and Toad Together by Arnold Lobel. This book was, again, another garage sale book. You know how garage sales are in my family, and so my grandma found me this Frog and Toad Together book. I got this book because I was completely and utterly obsessed with frogs. I had frog stuffed animals, and frog books, and frogs pillowcases, and frog pencils. You get the gist. Frog everything. So I was probably in the 3rd grade when I got it, and I have a younger sister named Emily who was probably in the 2nd grade at that time. Me and Emily were super close, and so when I read it out loud, normally I would read it to her. This book was all about a frog and a toad and how they can accomplish anything when they are together. I think that this was really significant because it brought my sister and I closer through a book, all because I loved the idea that it was about frogs. So just because it was about frogs, I'd read it to her when me and her just getting closer and bonding over this book that is all about friendship and how they can conquer anything. This book is called Gregor the Overlander by Suzanne Collins. So this book is more focused on, or this literary experience is more focused on a teacher rather than the actual book. In the 4th grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Geyer, and she's not the only time she will be mentioned. I remember always reading in her class. That's like all we did. And a quarter of the way through the year, she started having read aloud time right after lunch. And read aloud time, if you don't know, is when she would get a book that she liked and she would read it to the whole class. And normally, they were silly books, but she started the Gregor the Overlander series. This was my favorite time of the day because she had the coolest way of using voices and each character that it was like mentally painting a picture in my head of each of the characters and the scenes and what's going on, and if something exciting would happen, she would make it sound exciting. She wasn't boring with it. So this is now what I think of every single time we do a read aloud in class. I remember Mrs. Geyer, and I try to be exactly like her because if she can get a whole entire 4th grade class excited about a giant chapter book that didn't have any pictures, that's exactly what I want to be able to do. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is not necessarily a book like I have been doing, it's an actual experience I had with writing. This involves my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Geyer, again. We had a thing in the 4th grade called the writing tax, and that's when you start the writing test for the very first time. This is the only time that you have done it up until now. And I really was kind of skeptical in my writing skills at the time because, I'm a 4th grader. I don't really write well, nor do I have the best handwriting, so I didn't really know how I was going to do. And I'd never really been graded on a scale like this. So in case you don't know, there's a scale. 1 is the worst, and 4 is the very, very best you can do. So we did practice tests, and I wrote my heart out on these papers. I wanted a 4 so bad. Mrs. Geyer, if you got a 4, she would read your paper out loud during class. So every time I got my paper back, I would flip it over, and it would be a 3. I was so bummed out because I really, really, really wanted that 4. I wanted her to read my paper in class. Well, one day, I flipped over the paper, and it had a 4 on it. It was the best feeling in the entire world. She read my paper out loud, and everyone clapped at the end. That is why, to this day, that I am super confident in my writing skills. Finally, the last book and experience that I'm going to talk about is called Captain Underpants by Dav Pilkey. In elementary school, there were books circulating around called Captain Underpants. Everybody loved this book, and I don't know why. I guess it was just super funny to elementary school kids. They were so funny, but they were chapter books. And for some reason, chapter books scared the life out of me. So when I decided I wanted to read these, I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to do it without any help from my teachers or my parents. Turns out, I went to the library, I got the book, and I sat down and I started reading it. I read the whole book by myself, and I read almost everyone in the library after that. This book is significant to me because it was the very first chapter book that I actually accomplished reading by myself. And that's my literacy life map. Thank you guys for watching.